I certainly say, Madam Speaker, and I think Oregonians will agree with me.
Political bodies exist to secure responsible government and to execute the will of...
All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, hey, welcome back to the Oregon discussion on government efficiency. Oregon Doge. I'm Mike McLane. I serve in the state Senate, and I'm hosting today an episode on homelessness and addiction. What's going on in Oregon, how we're spending our money. We're going to dive in and look at the budget, hear about some of Oregon options that perhaps didn't make it through the legislature. And but I hear with my colleague from the House, Representative Darcy Edwards.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure.
And so, Rep. Edwards, what brought you to the legislature? Tell me a little bit about how you got here.
So part of the reason I ran for this is the addiction issue. I have a son that's in addiction, in active addiction. And I did time in Portland talking to different homeless people and addicts. And I was a mom, just a mom that cared for her kid. And there's nothing out there that can help these people. There was no playbook like go to this agency, do this. And so our laws just created a vacuum where anyone in the country could come. And they were coming from all over the country to Portland because it's the easiest place to do drugs. Yeah, what a journey we've been on in Oregon, and you in your personal life. And I also want to give a shout out to staff extraordinaire, Alex Lopez.
Thank you, Senator. Good to be back. And
Alex has been a regular on the podcast, doing research, helping with it. Alex works for Senate District 30.
Yes, sir.
In the Senate. That's my district for all the viewers who know that. Alex, it works with me and day in, day out, and I'm sure we'll do a podcast about the journey, being staff in the Senate someday.
That's anyway, a good one,
yeah. We might have to do a post-session a staff assessment. At any event, today, though, we're going to talk about addiction and the challenge in Oregon and homelessness. And Alex, you've got a few slides to at least get us going with. So could you take it from here?
Yeah. We're going to open up with a fan favorite. Where does Oregon rank? And of course, the topic is homelessness and addiction. So I've got 3 questions. Please do your best to assess and state where you think Oregon ranks based on the questions.
And this Darcy, is a fan favorite.
Okay.
I mean, the fans are flooding us in the comment section.
Wow.
Bring back where does Oregon rank?
Yeah. People should know where we rank.
Yeah.
And I actually have on my whiteboard in my office where we're the bottom and where we're the top.
Sure.
The top is very small and the bottom is very long. Sorry.
I will point out that Senator Bonham doesn't like this game very much because he's not the best at it, and he will admit that begrudgingly. So let's see.
Although the last time I was, we did this with him, he won. So he's like 1-4.
He loves the game now.
He
it's
loves
his favorite
the game.
game.
It's his favorite.
All right, we're ready.
It's a fan favorite.
Okay, and then you write your answer down.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Alrighty, so as of 2024, where does Oregon rank in homelessness according to population size? And the number that I have is according to worldpopulationreview.com, 1 being the absolute worst and 50 being the absolute best.
We have to be either 1 or 2 or 3.
I'm going to say 5.
Okay. I'm gonna need you to get a little bit more specific, Representative.
I'm gonna say, I'm gonna stick with 1.
You stick with 1? Okay.
For our size.
Alrighty. Okay. So in terms of homelessness, according to population size, we rank 4th. So I'm gonna give that to Senator
That was good.
McLane. Yeah.
I
4
almost
is
said
not
3.
good. We're 4th from the worst.
Yep. Yeah.
And okay,
Exactly.
so not good.
I think it was New York, Hawaii, California. Those are the the
Yeah.
other states that are
Wow.
right there.
Yeah.
So, all righty. Next question. Where does Oregon rank in homelessness among children?
Oh, I'm guessing 3.
Okay.
I'm guessing number 1 because I read something about this like a month or 2 ago. I think we're number 1.
Okay. Again, this is going to Senator McLane, and what you probably read was the Oregon Capitol Chronicle article that I pulled this from.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, the Capitol Chronicle did an article on it. The worst in the nation.
which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
I had
in the
hope for a
nation.
moment when you got 4th in the other one. So I was like, oh, maybe we're a little better. No,
Sure. Yeah. No.
those dreams were dashed.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Alrighty. So last question here. Where does Oregon rank in terms of illicit drug use?
Just in the country, not based on
Yeah.
Per capita,
Yeah.
per capita.
In the country, I believe.
I'm gonna say we're number 1. Now, illicit. That's interesting because we legalized it,
Right.
but
Right.
I'm still saying number 1.
Okay.
Well, I can't take number 1 now. So I'll stick with 3.
Stick with 3. Okay. Senator McLean again, number 1.
Number
right
1
on the dot.
Illicit because after Measure 110 passed, and we decriminalized it, and so I didn't know if illicit, but yes.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
We Oregonians know it. They see it. They feel it.
And that stat comes from a KGW article as well. And to this point of the illicit drug use, we talked about it on the DHS podcast, but we're also 50th in access to treatment.
Absolutely.
So,
And mental health treatment too.
yeah.
And those
correct.
two should go together.
So we're number 1 in illicit use of drugs, and we're dead last in services. Or
Correct.
Yeah, exactly.
jeez,
Correct.
I just don't think
Correct.
Oregonians. I mean, it's been out there. It's not like it's hidden, but I wonder sometimes if Oregonians really understand, how bad it is.
It has touched every single person in our state. And I will say, I hear from Oregonians all the time who do know that. And they are scrambling and crying out for help. And we don't have a direction for that. We have deflection. We have these programs that we, want to make sure we get all these bodies through, but we're not making sure that they're being helped. There's no number at the other end of that person going through that program to see if it actually did anything or they actually showed up. And that's the problem we have. The way we have the way we serve addicts in Oregon is a very low barrier, which means you can use right there. You don't have to be clean. There's no rules to follow to get services. And I'm a little old school. And I told my son, I said, you're probably not going to want to be in my state when I become this, because I'm going to build something that will actually help you. That's going, fentanyl stays in your system for 90 days. So you can still come down from that. It takes 90 days to get out of your system. And these programs, you can walk in and out. And so they never, ever can get that to that place where they have a clear mind.
So, so fentanyl is a scourge on our country and acutely on our state. And people have read about it and people have seen it. And, when did it get this bad? When did we start getting, as a state, flooded with fentanyl?
Well, probably when the borders got opened, because that comes up I-5, comes right from California. You can, I have prosecutors that I've spoken to that are like, Darcy, I was on I-5. I can tell you which cars have it. Like, I can tell you who's doing that just by looking at the car. And he goes, I know that sounds horrible, but that's really a fact. And I think that our Measure 110, actually, I believe this started with the meth. So I have kids that are adopted, and they were from that. So their parents were meth users. And that, the early 2000s was big here. And in DHS had a mandate. Basically, you didn't get your kids back. So anyway, long story short, we adopted. And I think that letting that get it so far out of control planted the seeds for all this other to come. It really is, like you said, that 20 odd years of one way direction has gotten us here. And I think fentanyl was poured on our country from outside interest. China, like, literally does that. That's where they go to Mexico, sell them the pressers to make the pills, and then they come up I-5 from California. And it's everywhere. It's Seaside had a big, huge bust of fentanyl. They had one the other day on I-5, I think, and it was like, I don't know, whatever it was. It was a large bust as well. So it's still coming up I-5.
So and I noticed there was a cartel bust, and the leader was here in Salem. And whether it was him or the others, but I heard just like some outrageous number of pills.
Yes.
And so one pill could be lethal. Is that right?
So fentanyl, one pill can be lethal, but literally if it's just sitting around the top of an eraser of a pencil, that amount will kill you. It can kill, I mean, the amount they found could kill the entire population of Portland. I think it was 3 times over.
My word.
And it takes very little. And if they didn't mix it right, you're going to die. And you're going to overdose. And that's the problem we have. We have an addiction problem, but we have on the other side of the coin kids who can order it off of, the internet, really. Go to Snapchat and you can find drugs. It's not hard. And they get one pill that, they're going to use to like study or whatever they're going to do. And it kills them.
Yeah.
And I've had those parents in my office.
Sure.
And they're also part of this. They're the victims of these crimes as well.
Yeah,
and it is a crime.
Yeah, I had a very close friend who passed away because of the wrong amount of fentanyl, and he just got caught up in that whole thing. And it's a tragedy. And obviously, like you mentioned the parental aspect of it. His parents are still going through that and recovering from it. It's senseless, and it's one of those things where it's like, it didn't really need to happen.
No.
So.
No, one bad decision should not end your life.
Exactly.
And the way that we are set up as a state, it was so interesting. I did have this happen to my son. He OD'd. They called me. I happened to be on vacation. He was an adult. And they said, we will keep your son alive long enough for you to get here. He's on a ventilator. And I'm like, what is he like? I didn't put the two together that he had this overdose. I didn't actually even know really about fentanyl till this came up. And this is a few years ago. And I said, well, what's wrong? And they said, oh, he's got pneumonia. I'm like, pneumonia? Where the heck did he get pneumonia? He was, skiing yesterday. Like, how did he get pneumonia in one day?
Yeah.
Come to find out. And later I got there finally and kind of through putting stuff together, I go, can you do a test to see if this was fentanyl? And they said, no, we can't because it's synthetic. It won't show up. And so they didn't even really act like it was an overdose, right?
Right.
And so I actually said, I think he was trying to commit suicide. Can you keep him on a cycle? And they were like, no, we don't really do that anymore. We don't do that anymore.
Wow.
But this goes along with that, where the parents don't have a say with their kids, but they're reeling, like your family, that friend's family's reeling from the residuals of this drug problem that we have that no one will say that we have.
Yeah.
And addiction, was your son ever at a point where he said, hey, I have an addiction, I need help?
Several times. And actually, he's out right now not asking for that help. I do have a lot of connections in that world of people who are doing good work, who are trying to help people.
Right.
And I want to give them credit for wanting to going out and trying to get people to get help. He's in a position, it's on him. As a mother who's a control freak, I would love to just take him off the street and go to Mexico and get him clean or do whatever. My husband says that's kidnapping and we cannot do that. So we don't do that. It is up to people to make that decision. But I think when you make things really easy and you give them all the services in the world, it's really hard for somebody to say, yeah, today I don't want to do this.
Yeah. So to a certain extent, compassion has to be questioned, whether it's genuine compassion. And I don't know what compassion versus enabling. I mean, in your lived experience and in your work in the legislature, and I know this is your first term, so you're early on in a lot of your work, but also the work you did before. How do people draw that line?
That's difficult. That's hard for me. My husband and I think back and forth. He will do things and I'll go, what are you thinking? And then I'll do things like, he'll go, what are you thinking? Why are you calling him or whatever? I think letting somebody sleep on the street and roll around on the ground is the most uncompassionate thing you can do. I think that it shows that you have zero compassion if you're okay with somebody living like that and allowing that and mandating around that as a right. That is not a right. And we shouldn't be treating people like that. So I'm compassion-ish, I would say. But on the other side of the coin, I know that you have to have guardrails and you have to have structure for people to get better because that's what they crave.
Well, my goodness, what a difficult journey your family's been on. And obviously your son survived in the hospital, the pneumonia. Did fentanyl put him in that state?
So I found out originally what that meant. Pneumonia, he asphyxiated. So anytime you have liquid in your lungs, that's pneumonia. And I'm like, couldn't you just say that? And so it took a lot for us to get the doctors to actually even say that. I'm not really sure why. It was kind of slightly COVID time, so maybe that's why they were trying to not say that. And it was a height of fentanyl. And fentanyl is an opioid, so it's very highly addictive. It's highly unstable drug.
Right.
And if you can't find that, you're still addicted to the opioid part. So you have to go to whatever is available. And so other drugs make resurgences. So like meth comes back up because, okay, maybe the fentanyl is getting a little more spendy. And so now they're going back to meth.
Right.
Or heroin will come back. So they all make their rounds. Fentanyl's the most recent, and I would say most deadly by far.
Oh, my word. Well, Alex, let's go ahead and get to, we are a discussion, and we've been on government efficiency, and there are policies we're talking about and whether they work. And we're going through budgets. As we've talked about, on this podcast is that Oregon is not prepared for what's happening at the federal level. And, right now, Oregon put one party in charge.
Yep.
And, the governor's Democrat, and the House and Senate are majority Democrats by far. And so, what we've seen in their press releases is they're blaming Trump, but it wasn't Trump that created the fentanyl crisis,
Absolutely
right?
not.
So one of the things that, regardless of what administration we have, we're almost at $37 trillion of national debt. The interest payments on that are going up. There's going to be net of inflation, a contraction of what services the federal government covers, how much are being transferred to the states. Oregonians pay federal taxes, and part of the tradition and part of our contribution in federal taxes is that, money comes back here for services and et cetera. Well, as that pipe of money gets contracted and reduced, Oregon has to face the fact that it's had mission creep, and we have so many more programs being funded based upon our general fund than we did, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so the premise is what we're trying to do is go through the budget and see where mission creep has occurred, because we want Oregon to be prepared. We want Oregon to succeed.
Absolutely.
But its current trajectory under its current leadership, it's not doing that. And from the standpoint of now we're faced with having to shortchange some of our core services because of all these other missions. So we look at budgets today. We're looking at the Housing and Community Services budget. And so we had $1.14 billion allocated in total the last biennium. And we're going to be working through that budget. They're doing it right now on what it will be the next biennium. $800 million in state bonds to finance the construction of affordable housing units. $800 million. $217.9 million to maintain statewide shelter operations. $188.2 million for rehousing efforts, $173.2 million to prevent homelessness through rent assistance and eviction prevention services, $105.2 million for long-term rental assistance, and $100 million for infrastructure development to support new housing projects. And so, this is not a small amount of money Oregon's spending to address a affordability problem and homelessness problem, which, we're going to talk about a little later in the podcast. Some folks have come in and said, hey, you can't just simply solve affordability without supply increase. But Oregon is lagging behind on supply. But as you can see, we're spending some real money on the demand side. Now, on the supply side, construction of affordable housing, if they're able to get that done, and some has getting done, and, it's interesting because that has its own problems. But any comment on the budget at all?
It's depressing. It's a good word to say. For what you've spent, what did you get for that money? Mm-hmm. And it's not a money issue that you're fixing. It's not about the money. It's how you're allocating those funds and making sure that what you paid for, you got. This is like money literally just going through, flush down the toilet, in my opinion, of what we got for that. We still have people on the street in Salem I mean, I drive by them. I commute in every day.
Yeah, or walk by them at lunch, right?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
And I am like, with the amount of money that we've paid out, to be honest, you literally would do better just giving them buying a house in their name and saying, good luck.
Well, and
It would be
yeah.
cheaper, by the way.
it's an extraordinary amount of money, and you're right. The results are not stellar, and of course, what we saw in your neighbor district, Senator Suzanne Weber's district, and Representative Javidy's, was you had folks who wanted to provide shelter and got priced out because Boley said, "Oh, you have to use prevailing wages, and you
Yes.
got to do this," and so you scratch your head and think, is Oregon committed to solve this or not?
I'm going to say something. I mean, I'm free to say what I want, I guess. I don't think so. I think they're so blinded by serving unions, serving whoever, that it really doesn't matter to them. I've said this before. I don't think they have compassion. That's not compassion. To help somebody figure out to get their life back in order. There's people, like I said, doing great work, nonprofits that are like, we're struggling. We have 8 people that we're working through this program. They're doing amazing, but we need, they're not going to get funded ever because they're actually doing things and they have a result. And at the end of the day, they're not, like you said, using the prevailing wage. That's why affordable housing is not affordable. It is the most expensive housing you can build.
And I know, at least in the Astoria story, did you read that? In Willamette, we ran an article about that. And, we talked about that on a previous episode here on the Oregon discussion on government efficiency, Oregon Doge. But but you had people, money outside of the government, trying to come in
Yes.
and provide housing. And the government says, no, you can only do it this way. And again, it's frustrating. The Willamette Week article kind of took them to task on it. And of course, people all over the political spectrum are going, what is going on? Why can't Oregon, get out of its own way?
That's the thing. We're in our own way. We're so overburdened with rules, regulations, to the point. I sit on home housing and homelessness, and we were talking about a bill that was for builders, and I had the home builders director there.
Yeah.
And I said, I got a quick question for you. How many of your builders have left Oregon? And she was like, and I said, well, they're committed to working. And I go, yeah. But like, how many of them left? Because I wanted to make a point that we're so awful to business in Oregon that builders, they can leave.
Yeah, they get frustrated.
They're bogged down with paperwork, rules, permits, the fees, those STR fees, all of those fees and so forth, and rules upon rules. And this is how you have to do everything. People can go somewhere else. And we have other states that are very interested in our businesses. They headhunt for them. Keene, a shoemaker in downtown Portland, left. They're going to Kentucky.
Yeah.
And so can anybody.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail right on the head. Yeah, 100%.
So
this is the proposed budget in 20. This was the recommended from the governor, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So the governor would increase it to 1.3 billion, and you see the another appropriation of 880 million. She would want new bonds to build affordable housing. So that's roughly 1.7 billion if she gets what she wants in expenditures in the over a 4-year period.
Right.
And anyway, you can see the slide, and again, more trying to produce a solution, which is, for the government to say, hey, we're going to, what I understand from some of the frustration is that even those who are proponents of affordable housing and for the government to spend this level of money, they're frustrated at the pace, and because of our land use system, and there's appeals, and
Yes.
the process in Oregon to get something built is extraordinarily difficult, and certainly compared to other states.
Absolutely. And I can tell you, I'm Metro adjacent, so right outside of Metro. And for those folks that are in the Metro, they have to do 2 housing needs assessments, not just one, not just the state one that is burdensome. And I did say to the governor's person on home building, I said, you're wrong on your needs analysis. It's not great. So maybe you could fix that. That'd be great. And he was like, yeah, you're right. But they have 2 they have to do, and they have to come up with the money for that. And so like you said, the way we have our land use laws, they're so set up to have zero growth except inside of an urban growth boundary. And when you put those parameters on cities, it's just overwhelming, and it does take forever. Everything takes forever. And it's absolutely should not. It took a lot line adjustment, just even like for my family, a lot line adjustment really was what it was a 3-year process.
Yeah, and I think, what's interesting is, people are discovering that, this land use system we have, which has many benefits, but when you start to lay out, okay, this isn't working in this area, it's not working in this area, you'd think you'd shot someone's dog. The vitriol of the response, and you're like, oh, I'm not saying throughout the system. What I'm saying is, if something's not working, let's look at fixing it and making modifications. But there are so many people who are absolutist, and but it's not working.
It's not.
And we have a high cost of living, and we're number 4 in homelessness, right? Number 1 in children's homelessness, right? So how is that acceptable? And yet, again, we go through this legislative session, and we're going to be coming to the end, and again, solutions, or people who are solutions are disregarded, people are sidelined who are trying to advocate. And it's like, okay, so then the solution, I guess, from the governor and the legislative leadership is to, let's just pour money.
Let's just increase this budget by 15.4%. That's what they're asking for.
Yeah.
Let's just do it again.
Do it
That's
again.
a crazy raise.
It is a crazy
maybe it'll
raise.
be different this time.
Maybe.
It's never, just a heads up, it's never going to be different.
No.
It's not going to be, you're not going to get a different result doing the same thing. In fact, I think that's the description or definition of insanity, doing the same
Yes.
thing over and over,
And expecting
hoping
different results.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Alex, what's next?
It's just another highlight too of more of the problems with Oregon and its homelessness. Severe housing shortage. You were kind of hitting that.
I jokingly said this to somebody, which I don't know if I should repeat here, but I'm going to. And I said, our the housing crisis, not the homelessness crisis, but the housing crisis is kind of over because everybody's leaving. So you don't have to rush on that.
Jeez.
Well,
That's and I said it mockingly.
I
appreciate satire, and so
we need
one solution is to drive everyone out, but no, but I see the 2024 Portland State estimates on the need of 100 additional housing units, and family homelessness. The state has the highest rate of homeless families in the nation.
How is that acceptable?
How's that acceptable?
It's not. It's when you said that about the children that are homeless, that to me, that's abuse at a certain point. It's abusive to our taxpayers, to be honest, to be living in a state where that's acceptable.
Yeah,
And
and you know, the interesting thing is because when you are in the Capitol and you're talking with people, I've never met a legislator or a governor who said it's acceptable. But what you're saying in essence is why you're acting like it is. If it's unacceptable, we all agree it's unacceptable. And the fact that unhoused families live, so many of them are unsheltered, you know, that, you know, then do something. Right. And so the solution currently by Governor Tina Kotek and the Democrat leadership in Salem is to pour in more money, but there hasn't been, I don't think really, any policy bills that make it easier to get these housing units. I believe that if you said, hey, here's a way for builders to increase supply, get more homes built and on the market, more housing units, they would do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Right? Because they're in business to build and make a profit.
Absolutely.
But if you raise the cost through the time and as we discussed, the fees and et cetera, then you get, then you get this system that is not acceptable. Then why are they doing the same thing? And recently I read Portland at least proposed, the mayor of Portland maybe, and that they were going to suspend SDC charges, system development charges, just try
something.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, here's something different by saying we could make it cheaper for people to use private sector money to go out and build. And I haven't followed up to find out, is that official policy or not? Have they officially adopted it? But I appreciated the fact that, somebody in the city of Portland stated the obvious.
Sure.
Right. Yes.
But I do see you have a highlight there that Measure 110, a disaster, which I think many of us would agree. Maybe not all on the left, but it was unacceptable to so many. In fact, the legislature came in and reformed it. But $400 million that came in 2022 to negate the impacts of this ballot measure. When I think about that ballot measure, which, allegedly, because I don't have the facts on it, was primarily funded by folks that were out of state.
Sure.
Yes,
And in essence,
absolutely.
if you get, some California billionaire, and again, that's the story I was told. I don't have it, but to come in and experiment
Oh, yes.
on us,
Yeah. Yeah.
our families, our communities. And it's hard to find someone who says that was a raging success. It was not. Maybe there's still some on the left. I don't know. But
Sure.
I don't find anybody really talking about let's do that again.
No.
The interesting thing about that too is, again, same with you. I don't have all the facts right here in front of me, but I believe that ballot measure too, I think there was some people who voted for it not exactly knowing because of how the ballot measure was written and how it was funded to be written. So I think that there was some voters out there that might have not totally understood what was really going to happen when they voted it into.
I did hear from a prosecutor that told me, they said, I voted for this thinking
Right.
it was this. And he goes, at the end of the day, they lied to us.
Yes.
And he was like hurt. And at that moment I was like, okay, trust no one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
kind of like, And it was a lesson in trust, and that you cannot, I think it's cemented in some people's minds that you cannot trust your government. You can't trust leaders that are helping you or it really developed that mistrust. It was a part of that, but it was an underlying foundational part of that because they didn't do what they said they were going to do.
Well, and I think back now to some of the policies that, whether it was, defund police in Portland and, Measure 110 that made our communities, and certainly in Portland, so distasteful when it came to public safety and,
Yes.
the downtown corridor, and, you could go on. And of course, there are so many folks that supported that now want to pretend that never happened,
Yes.
that they never took that vote. That
Yes.
and I'm like, no. You need to be held accountable
Absolutely.
to what you did. And but I suppose if voters or listeners, if no one ever changes how they vote, there's no consequence
Right.
for this majority party continuing with ideas that are not producing livable communities. And then, of course, the solution, as we can see, is pouring more money. And this time it'll work. And as I call it, the pixie dust theory of government. You just sprinkle pixie dust and everything's going to be okay. And
Right.
that's not what we've experienced. So in this book that I'm reading currently,
Oh,
Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, in the chapter, This is Your State on a Housing Shortage, it states that California has built about half as many housing units as Texas, despite having 9 million more residents. And that book, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, Ezra Klein works for the New York Times, and Derek Thompson, I believe, for the Atlantic Monthly. But, they're not conservatives. They say we're liberal guys, and, but they articulate that it's policies from the left, or as I think it was Mr. Christoph called the West Coast liberalism versus other liberalism, that has produced this acute problem, in part from policies that, well-intentioned or not, are exacerbating the policy, and an inability of the West Coast Democrats to acknowledge it. Now, maybe some are, but this book is quite extraordinary in its ability to identify the core issues driving this. And so they go on and say, so what does explain homelessness? The availability of and cost of housing. As the cost of rents rise, so too does the number of homelessness. As the vacancy rate plummets, meaning that housing market is tight, with too many buyers and too few sellers, the homelessness rises. And so they talk about in the book, they actually have a section where they analyzed and said, look, here, drug use, they go through all these factors to discuss, different theories on what's driving homelessness. And in the book, they conclude the one statistic which actually then correlates is the cost of housing.
Yep.
yes.
And so they go on to look at and say, what does drive the cost of housing, the rental market, the home buying market? And in the book, they talk about no growth policies, land use policies that in the end don't want growth and only want a certain percentage, a year. And they focus mainly on California. They compare it to like Austin, Texas, and some other places. Right. And it's and Oregon is absolutely in this. We're our statewide policies and the governance that we have is doubled down.
Yes.
And so we have incredibly expensive housing in Oregon, and we have high homelessness, and they're correlated.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And there's a whole generation of people, I would say in my daughter's demographic, who's about 30-ish, that literally have lost hope in ever buying a house. And they will say it's not just the rate. So I'm a realtor in real life, so I understand the rate question that people have. Oh, the rate. It's not about the rate. every single
You
thing.
mean the interest rate on
the
a-
interest rate on,
on a
the
mortgage.
on a mortgage.
Right.
It's everything else that cost as well has gone up.
Right.
And the housing cost and prices have gone up so much that someone by themselves, like my daughter, who's in my house right now, can't get her out because she's like, Mom, I don't have another partner.
Yeah.
I'm by myself and
Yeah.
I'm trying to do this and
Sure.
work full time. Sometimes these people have 2 and 3 jobs
Right.
just to have that affordability to rent. And rent in Northwest Portland-ish, I will say Sylvan area, a 1970s apartment building, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
not
yeah.
bougie by any stretch of
Sure.
the imagination. That starts at about $2,200 for a 1-bedroom without the parking or in a garage.
Right.
Plus your electricity, plus your water, plus.
Right.
So you're at a mortgage payment already, but just people can't save money to have that down payment.
Yeah, the down payment and you know, so much of it is, you know, chasing the train that's pulling away.
Right.
And for those who can get on and get into home ownership, you know, they can service that, invest in the home, and obviously it becomes, for most people, their main investment. And but it offsets, of course, their need for housing, and so, you know, it becomes incredibly smart to do. And but if you don't have supply increases
Right.
on the sheer amount of housing
Yeah.
units,
Simple supply and demand.
supply and demand, and the costs will stay up. So go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those land use laws, don't get me started.
So I wanted to compare Oregon to a state that had the most similar population to us. And behold, I found Oklahoma. I don't think it's much of a surprise that Oklahoma is a very, you know, red state, Republican state. I believe they have control of both houses and the governorship. But the interesting thing is we've got about 3 times the homelessness rate. It looks like 22,000, basically 23,000 to
But I think it's 4
5,500.
times, actually.
It might even,
Yeah,
I
it's
think
4
you're right, 4 times. And on the spending side of it, Oregon in the past biennium spent $1.14 billion, and Oklahoma spent $231.9 million. So that's about, Oregon spent about 80% more on homelessness, but yet we still have 4 times the homelessness population. So clearly there's a way to do this more efficiently without spending all the money, right? And I think Oklahoma proved that. Now, if the same party stays there, is that really going to happen? Stays here in Oregon? If I just,
Well, it does
know.
go down to, I mean, when you look at, I mean, it's a comparable.
yeah,
Both
same,
states
yeah.
start with the letter O. They have roughly the same population.
yeah, 4.1 million about.
Their land grant universities' colors are orange and black.
Correct.
You know, just like ours. And so now, striking difference in cost. Now, some would say, yeah, but, you know, people, so the demand is higher in Oregon, which raises the cost of housing. And that's exactly what I think Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson are, you know, would say in their book is that you got a market difference in setting price affordability, and as a result, we're having to spend a bunch of more money, 80% more, on trying to alleviate our homelessness problem, and you know, and so when we say it's a problem, what's the function of government? Well, part of it is to go in and say, okay, where do we need to alleviate, you know, a lot of the suffering and people who have challenges and need some help and et cetera. And so I understand even Oklahoma is spending money, right? So it's not the issue
Right.
of like, well, don't spend any money. But again, I think it's an issue that you have higher affordability issues being driven by demand. and supply. And we aren't going to escape that market function.
Right. They also, I would assume, and this is a total assumption, they have a respect for police. Police are elevated there. We're in the opposite camp of that. Portland disproved that through their city council meeting last night, where they allocated $2 million away from the police to give to the parks. So I'm guessing that Oklahoma has a greater respect for law, and lawlessness is not tolerated as much there as it is here.
So the city council last night in Portland
Went till midnight.
reduced the budget for public safety for the police. So, wow, given all their challenges, and that's their choice. And, I'm not saying parks don't deserve funding, right?
Absolutely.
But
Right.
I guess it's to a certain extent, you have to ask the question, how did Portland find itself in a situation where it felt like, okay, and isn't their budget like $8 billion or something crazy like that?
Yeah.
And in the hole by how much? They have a shortfall.
Right.
A large shortfall.
So how did they get here to where that's the decision they're making? And you can't ignore how they got here and then simply accept that choice.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's mismanagement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For
decades, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
well, didn't know that. Good current info update on, once again, Portland never ceases to amaze me in that choice.
My dad was a Portland firefighter, and so I heard all about Portland growing up, about the union or whatever, whatever in the city council forever. It was always blank, problems that they were having with the city. So this isn't a new. I heard this when I was 8, so it's not a new problem that they have. The way they do things have always been off.
Right.
And, there's a joke in my industry that Portland is where 20-year-olds go to retire because it's cool. It's weird. I love Portland. I have to say, I miss my Portland.
Yes.
I miss going down and having dinner and having a great night out and the music and all of the beautiful things that Portland has to offer and could offer with the right leadership. They could offer that again. It was a gorgeous city.
Yeah, I lived there from 1994 through 2003 and lived in Northeast Portland. We loved living there.
Yeah.
And streets were clean. I mean, you just think, okay, what happened? But that's another episode. So
Yes, we will get there.
Sorry.
We will.
I sidetracked.
let's continue.
We'll get there. And on a side note, I know for a fact too that Oklahoma didn't decriminalize drugs.
Right.
That's probably another
good
little
point.
Absolutely.
That's a good
tidbit
fact.
in there as well. So similar to the housing budget, this is the current or the spending on addiction for the past biennium. 1.1 billion in total funding. 278.9 million from Measure 110 funds for addiction treatment, overdose prevention, peer support services, and other investments in substance use treatment and services. 195.7 million for continued funding for aid and assist services, certified behavioral health centers, and other investments launched in 2021. Again, all this is a similar theme of in response to Measure 110, right? 47.6 million for mobile crisis teams, 40 million in ongoing funding for additional mental health residential capacity, 14.9 million to expand jail diversion programs, and 50 million for staffing and faculty upgrades at the Oregon State Hospital.
So, when I look at our budget in Oregon, this is not a small amount.
No.
Oregon is spending, so whether you look
for the
at
general.
the affordable housing or, in that agenda, homeless services, and you look at how much we're spending on addiction services, this is not a small amount of money.
No, it's staggering amount of money.
So, Representative Edwards, how's Oregon doing?
Well, I think we found out we're number one as the worst. And like I think I said on our panel, we have lumped in housing and homelessness together. Same kind of thing with addiction. It's just lumped out there, but there's no connecting. So there's like $40 million in ongoing funding for additional mental health residency capacity. But guess what? What we're number one in also. We're number one worst for mental health. These two go together. They should be married. One person's mental health issue is another person's addiction.
So elaborate on that. Because what I found in some of my experiences being in the courtroom and serving for a period of time as a judge, and what I found is that, and again, this is anecdotal. This is my experience. I haven't necessarily read a bunch of data. I'm just saying what I observed. That a lot of folks, and I think in my experience, a lot of young folks who have mental health problems self-medicate, they self-treat, and then that produces addictions.
Absolutely.
And that you can get someone into services to try to address the addiction. But if you don't look at the person as a whole, then again, the mental health issues will often facilitate that person going back into addiction, or maybe in other areas of life where they have great disrepair. Has that been your experience as well?
Absolutely. So when you're, trying to function in life with, let's say ADD or something, you try something in college or whatever. Oh, that helped me study. It helped me study. So how's that hard? How's that bad? But also when you take drugs, whatever mental illness or problem you have, it's amplified. And it kind of pulls it out. So you may not have really had that as a mental illness before, but using drugs amplifies it.
Sure.
And then on the other side of that, you might just have no mental illness, but using drugs causes mental illness because it burns parts of your brain. So it causes those things. So they're kind of intertwined. And to not serve them kind of together doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If it was perfect world and I had billions of dollars at my disposal, I would build a facility that had addiction on one side, 200 beds, and mental health on the other. And they probably would, once you got this handled, we'll go over here and do this. Mm-hmm. And it would be a long program.
One of the things that's interesting we're in the legislature, and obviously Alex works in the legislature as staff. And, we don't have medical experts on, but I have sat through so many hearings because I did 5 terms in the House last decade, and then I left for a period of time. And, the massive amount of information you get from experts and, is extraordinary. And this idea that, only experts can advise on what to do about addiction, what to do about mental health. And, after a while, it was, the refrain from my Democratic colleagues who would say, well, this is evidence-based, and the phrase was evidence-based services. And and it was like, okay, I admit you're experts, and the experts who have analyzed addictions and the chemicals and all of the stuff of a human body, they will know more than I ever will. But what we're doing isn't working. And if what we're doing isn't working, if pragmatically, it's not functioning, then we have to question whether we go forward and continue to this system. But so many of Oregon's current policy in our solution, the spending in our budget, is driven by experts. And so after a while, I'm like,
yeah.
But so, and that leads to this compassion system where it's like, okay, here's what happens in the brains, and this is the chemicals and stuff like that. So, this is how Oregon should have a system to provide addiction services and to help. But I don't think, the group hug approach is working. And so you've lived it. Is it tough love? What's going to work?
Like I said, I haven't tried the kidnapping part because I've been told not to. It's a bad look.
I'm not acting as your attorney, but I think your husband's right.
He is very right.
You probably
that's why
shouldn't do
we're
that.
married. He's the voice of reason. I'm the mom who wants to go and fix everything. And I think it is based on how that person you can connect with them. Being able to connect with somebody on the street and having a bed for them to go to right then, because they have about 5 minutes of attention, that's what you have to do. And if we're going down the road of deflection, which we kind of are, having a strong police presence that is able to have a conversation, because they see those people every day, and having them to build that relationship and say, hey, come on, Max, or whoever, I got a bed for you right now. Let's go. Today's that day. And being able to have that conversation, because if you can catch them when they say yes and you have somewhere to take them that is set up, you're gold. It's better.
Yeah.
The average addict on fentanyl goes to rehab about 7 times.
7 times.
Wow.
Yeah,
It's difficult.
and speaking of compassion, Alex has a slide called the stabbing wagon. What is this, Alex?
Well, it was a very popular story a couple years back. I actually just stumbled upon it. I had no idea about it. I was actually watching another podcast and somebody mentioned it, and I was like, "What?" And of course they said it was in Portland, and I was like, "Okay, well that sadly that makes sense."
I listen to that same podcast. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And I was just like, okay, but essentially, and I think the viewers really need to hear this. The stabbing wagon, and I've got the news story in front of me. It was from the New Yorker, and I believe it was from 2022, kind of during the fallout again of Measure 110 and all that stuff. And it's a nonprofit who received money from the state to operate down in Medford and in Portland as well. And the director, Melissa Jones, has been in the news a lot. And she operates a wagon full of needles and gauze, pipes, soap, hand sanitizer, test strips. And it goes along with the theme of compassion. Is this a real compassionate thing to do? A woman driving around in a wagon, basically ringing the dinner bells for addicts to come and get clean needles to continue to use again. I think I don't even know what to say.
Is it compassion?
No,
like,
it's kind of stupidity. Sorry, I just said
It's
stupidity.
insane.
It's insanity.
You're
and
freed up here on the Oregon
thank
Doge
you.
podcast.
I just feel like it is. We are like you said, love everybody, help everybody, but I was raised that if you need. Sometimes love is not super looks compassionate. And I will say this, my son, it's interesting, he's never violated my rules He's never really violated my rules. Because he knows. I said, I love you with all my heart, but I won't help you. And I think when I was down in Portland talking to people, it was really interesting because I was looking for my son. He was missing, and I did missing persons, and I had a photo of him. And every person I talked to was like, man, I wish my mom would come look for me. And I'm like, go call your mom. Like, go do that. And I think that's the part we're missing here, is giving them somewhere to go back home. You know, it's okay to go home. And this, I mean, I would be interested to see what the numbers of the people that she's served have died.
That's
my number.
really
I want,
great.
I know.
Point.
I want to know.
And for her, you know, not to dwell on her, but her background, she's a self-described police abolitionist who argues that law enforcement should be barred from responding to substance use. That's a very interesting piece. And she's also been seen at events handing out stickers that read ACAB, which translate to all cops are bastards. So that gives her a little background. But in the discussion of government efficiency, she was awarded $2.1 million in state funding to operate.
$2.1 million.
in
I want
state
to see her
funds.
house.
State
Taxpayer
funds.
money.
Yeah.
Taxpayer money from Oregon.
To drive around with needles and provide a quote unquote compassionate approach to the addiction problem.
So and that's why I want Oregonians to know, and let's have the discussion. Is this how you want your taxpayer money spent? Is this compassion? You know, and I know people can, you know, I assume make arguments on both sides, but after this experiment we've had, you know, where people came in and experimented on our state, on our communities, right? And after this long period of time of, you know, one party rule, is this the government we want to have? Does this help people get out of addiction? And, you know, I know some of the arguments, well, it helps prevent, you know, disease transfer by dirty needles. And I mean, you have arguments about, you know, health and public health perhaps, but, you know, do Oregonians want this? And, you know, what I'm hearing from you in your experience being a mom and having to search for your son struggling, you know, with an addiction in Portland, is this isn't what you want to see.
No, and that $2 million could have went to an organization that's actually doing work.
Bingo.
And that's the part that bothers me, is that, you know, when you were talking about, evidence-based, well, let me see your evidence. I want you to prove to me what your evidence is, you know, who's your study done by, who paid for your study. That's what I want to know. I want to know, you know, when they say that, explain what that means to you. Show me your plan of action. I have a business. I have a business plan. And when you are dealing with people's lives, you should have a plan. And I want to see your plan to tell me if it's, you know, where is your evidence? Because I can say it's scientifically proven all day long. Hopefully you'll go look and see if that's actually true. But they're banking on the fact that you won't.
Roger that. And so we have a reality check time, and this is part of the show when we look at a bill and we basically say, all right, let's have a reality check. And this particular bill, instead of looking at something which we do often, that is extraordinarily questionable, and, you know, we all just go, what the hell are these guys thinking?
Sure.
Here we have a bill. Tell us about this one, Alex.
Yeah, so this was House Bill 2432 that I believe it was yesterday, Representative.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'll read from the House Republican press release here that House Republicans forced a vote on a bill that would have repealed HB 3115, which the then Speaker of the House, now Governor Tina Kotek, was the chief sponsor of, which allows homeless people to live on public property and sue cities and counties for camping enforcement policies they feel are not objectively reasonable, whatever that means without clearly defining what that means. But the vote on HB 2432 failed with 28 to 24 votes. 6 Democrats joined Republicans in supporting the bill that would return control to local leaders to manage the homelessness crisis in their jurisdictions. So, Representative Edwards, I do want to kind of get your take on that and why you were supportive of the bill, and maybe your speculation as to why it didn't make it through.
Well, I think it's business as usual on the Democrat side. The 6 Democrats that did vote were probably allowed to.
It's a great point, right?
I
For
mean,
cover.
And I have to say, I am so new that like when I'm watching on the floor and they're doing votes and they're tapping and talking and like, you can do that. I'm just like appalled by that. And I know we don't do that on our side, really.
No,
we don't.
yeah, it's like
it's
that,
like, you got to vote with your heart. I know you're going to be by yourself, but you're fine. And so we don't do that. And I'm appalled by that. But the sick, I believe they know they're wrong. They have leadership that will tell them all day long that if you vote against us, we will primary you. That's common.
Yes.
I hear that all the time. Like, I really want to support you, but I can't because, my boss basically, or my manager will, I'll get written up. Mm-hmm. And so, but I think they know this isn't working. And I think we need to scare them that their seats are up because their seats are up.
Yep.
We can take those seats anytime we want, just letting people know how this operates. I think you could do that on this bill alone, just knowing that
The background and whatnot.
their own constituents are mad. They're angry. I'm going to get a bunch of calls now from Portland, because I do, saying, okay, now we're done. Now we're ready to go. And so people are leaving the city, big businesses leaving the city and our state. And so their constituents are mad.
Yeah, in this particular
They're
bill,
not
it was, again, addressing our livability issues.
Absolutely.
And so you'll hear Democrats say, well, that was a procedure. That was, we vote against pulling bills because of the process issue, but yet 6 Democrats voted for it. So it clearly wasn't a procedural vote, right? So it was a decision not to move a bill that addressed, a pretty significant issue. And, again, livability. And the governor, who was Speaker of the House for a long period of time during this once they had full authority and ran this agenda aggressively on the left, and they don't want to change. They don't want to acknowledge that there's problems. And the solution is pour more money in, pixie dust,
to a problem
legislative agenda
created, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
Well, I think I think it's changing. I think that our constituencies are angry. I will say that. I think they're angry. I think they're angry in Portland. And if I was to go to one of their meetings, I bet I would hear that.
I think that's...
I think that they're on the edge. If they have to be really careful.
People are tired of it. And they're tired of a philosophy of government that, again, is it enabling? Is it compassion? Where's it at? But we just know it's not working.
Right.
But we don't see a readiness yet of the one-party rule in Oregon, the Democratic Party, because they could do this. They could address that the fact is that these policies aren't working. And I know it's hard to admit, okay, I voted for something and it's not working, I'm going to vote right? But yet we saw in some of the reforms, even in Measure 110, as limited as it was, there was acknowledgement this isn't working.
Right.
But when it comes to addiction and the services, when it comes to homelessness and the services, they're not ready to admit. Now, Measure 110 said we're going to deal with this as to deflection services, et cetera. So, maybe that's the box they checked and said, this is all the reform we want to make. But it's not producing the results that people want to see.
It's not good enough and it's not fast enough.
No. And we need, so what else do you got, Alex?
I've got some other stuff here that if we want to close out, this is a Central Oregon yearly point in time. I think that Portland gets a lot of the attention,
right?
But Central Oregon, especially
Yes.
Bend, is just having a really, really tough time.
Right.
And this is a report from KTVZ that Central Oregon's yearly point in time count finds number of homeless has risen 17% in the past year, but over the past 5 years, they're up 89% in total homelessness. And of the total homelessness, or the total homeless surveyed across the region, 2/3 were unsheltered, and 1,442 said they were living outside in a vehicle. Also, 80% of these counted said they've been homeless for over a year. So, I again, Portland's always getting a lot of the attention, but I think, and having worked for Lori, a lot of those settlements, if you will, out in China Hat in Central Oregon. I mean, it's lawless out there. We don't know what they're doing. Forest Service doesn't want to take it on. There's just a lot of problems that are going on down in Central Oregon.
They did recently say we're closing it off, and they moved folks on because it became so bad.
Yeah.
And but yes, it's not confined to Portland, and I live in Central Oregon. I don't live in Bend, but you can see the increases. And so if you have so many programs and an incredible amount of money done by the state government, and yet in the last 5 years, it's gotten worse.
It's gotten worse
in Central Oregon.
Yeah.
So, so the solution is just add money. No. And of course, I would love to know what's your evidence-based, solution to that. Meaning, at what point do you just add so much money it works, or have you not thought that through? Because ultimately, they have to challenge the very premise: is
Absolutely.
Is this fact that we have a supply problem? You have to build more units of housing, and until the affordability, the rental rates come down, arguably, as in the book Abundance, we talked about, their premise is it's not homelessness and it is not coming down. You have to build. You got to build.
Well, we have a lot of room to build in Oregon.
So
and guess what? We have the timber to build those houses, to make them affordable. So when you're buying your timber for your house outside of your state, it gets more expensive.
Yeah, and oh my goodness, that's of course another podcast just on what's happened to the timber industry. Anything else, Alex?
I think that pretty much covers everything.
Well, I hope folks realize that, when you look at the budget and what we're doing with addiction services and homelessness services and, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5 billion, it is not an insignificant amount of money in a state with 4.2 million people. When you look at the size of our budget and you look at what we're saying no to in our budget, saying, no, we can't afford that. Well, okay, then if you're going to spend, an additional 1.4, 1.5 billion, whatever in this, or I guess when you add both in there, it'd be 2.5, but on addiction services and homelessness services. And, what can we do to make sure we're getting results? And of course, what it's going to cause or to address it, frankly, they have to acknowledge, the governor, the legislative leadership at a certain point has to acknowledge the conflict in their own philosophy. They're going to have to acknowledge that the, folks that are restricting growth of housing supply, is that compassionate? If you're protesting a triplex being built up the street, is that compassion?
Right.
I mean, all Oregonians have to probably, have a little self-awareness or a little gut check on saying, what state do we want to be?
Absolutely. So in my district, I have different areas, and it's from one to the next, totally different. So we have banks that kind of just did their own thing and said, yeah, we're just going to build these 1,500 houses in a one stoplight town. Probably not the best way to do it, but could have planned it better. You have North Plains that are like, they had the ability to expand and said, no, we don't want to do anything. And then I have Columbia County, who's like, please bring us all your jobs. We have, the space for your manufacturing. We have OMIC. We have all of these things that we want to grow. And so you have different places that want different things. And we can abide by most of that. I think the problem comes with the NIMBYism, not my backyard.
Right.
And it does. And you're right. It drives our state. And when that's the problem, you have to change their philosophy on that. Things change. I live out in Banks. Things are going to change. Mm-hmm. And people have, it's going to happen. And it's unfortunate. If I get that you want to live out in the country. I've lived in the country my whole life. But I do understand that at the end of the day, they need housing.
Right.
And so we're going to have to figure out a way to do that. I do believe in smart growth. I believe you can do it well and not have too much of the heartburn. Mm-hmm. But it takes very skilled leadership to do that.
Yeah, we get, ultimately, we have to have an increased supply of housing. Mm-hmm. And if we're not going to do that, or we're going to do it at such a slow pace because we won't recognize we have a system that is slowing it down, extending it out, making it more expensive, then we're not going to see these problems solved. And but the solution so far, and we'll see what the co-chairs come out with, the governor's recommended budget is to add more money and, sprinkle pixie dust. Mm-hmm. And so we'll see if that works. Well, thank you for being on the Oregon Doge, and that wraps it for now.
This was fun.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah,
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.